Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about one of the many problems in the new show Star Trek Picard, and that is the Borg in this show. Now, the Borg started out as an awesome villain species in Star Trek. I made a whole video just about that topic, why the Borg idea was so awesome. And what happened next is basically a decline of them being a big threat, and that happened even during TNG itself. That's why my criticism is not only against Voyager and the new show, but even in TNG itself. They had only two great episodes about the Borg, the first one about them, and the second one, which was a two-parter. And they were awesome because in those episodes the Borg were like an almost unstoppable force, and they were actually scary and creepy, and that's why they made such a good villain. However, later on, whenever the Borg did appear again, they always had a bunch of weaknesses, and they were easy to defeat, and so they were no longer as scary as they were before. Later on, we had the movie First Contact, in which they did succeed to make the Borg scary again. Like in their first appearances, they upgraded their look, they made them look more scary simply visually, and showed how strong they are, how much it takes to defeat them. And so that shows that it is still possible to do it if you want to. If you try hard enough, you can make them a good villain again. And even in their first appearances in Voyager, they also still felt like the same old Borg. They still felt powerful. They were still a collective. It took a lot to be able to stand against them or to escape from them. And so they were still, I think, pretty good in the two-parter episode called Scorpion. They had no Borg Queen in that episode, and so it felt like the good old Borg. And because they introduced that bigger enemy, that could explain why Voyager was able to make an alliance with the Borg and all of that. So that was believable enough, in my opinion. So I liked that two-parter. And the real problem started later on. First of all, the Borg Queen is a whole other problem I discussed in a whole video. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think if they make her simply like the voice of the Borg, not a leader, and make her creepy and scary and all of that, that can be good for your villain, because that basically gives you a face to talk to, and if it's played by a good actress, then she can be scary and all of that, like in First Contact. And so it's not necessarily the worst thing about what they did to the Borg. I think the worst thing is the fact that in Voyager they just made it easier and easier to defeat the Borg until the point of total absurdity. Toward the end, they were simply blowing up cubes left and right with no problem. They were not scared of the Borg at all. You had no tension. So basically they made the Borg a pathetic villain. So it was like the villain of the week. And also they kind of forgot about what made the Borg so unique and so powerful. The fact that they are cyborgs, the fact that they are hooked into their ship's computer, they can control the ship with their mind. Instead, we started seeing the Borg using buttons, looking at view screens, and behaving like any other alien in Star Trek. So what's the whole point of you being half robots and hooked to a collective if you're behaving like every other alien? So that's the kind of stupidity that kind of ruined the Borg in Voyager. Now, I was hoping that in Star Trek Picard, when I heard the Borg are going to be in the show, I was hoping maybe they'll do what First Contact did and restore the Borg to an actual villain, to show them being scary once again, have them come back as the scary big villain that it's hard to defeat. That might be cool, and also with new special effects, they can make them be even creepier. They can do it in a kind of horror movie kind of way if they take some inspiration from H.R. Giger, which was, by the way, one of the original inspirations for the design of the Borg. You know, if you look at some of the paintings, there are a lot of similarities. Probably not a coincidence. I do think someone kind of looked at that and took some inspiration when they designed the Borg. So if you take some of his more extreme ideas and show that kind of stuff, all those biomechanoids, people who are grown into permanent workstations and all that kind of creepy stuff, if you show it with good special effects in a creepy way, that can be great, and it can be done cheaply with today's special effects. And also showing their giant ships and showing that from the inside in a good way. The kind of stuff they love doing in Star Trek Discovery, showing the Discovery ship for some reason being so huge on the inside, and I always said it makes no sense, it's bigger than the ship is on the outside. However, if you show that with a Borg cube, which we know is huge, then that would fit in that scenario. And so they did kind of show that in one episode of Picard, but it was done in a lame way, it wasn't impressive, just a waste of an opportunity. And now I want to get to the biggest problem in Picard so far, is that in the Picard show the Borg are not even the villains, they're the victims now. There's nothing scary about them at all anymore, so it's simply worse than what was done in Voyager, because at least in Voyager they were still the villain, they were still a threat to the ship, they were still someone you have to defeat or escape, so it still had some kind of tension, some kind of a threat to the heroes. And look at what they did in this show. So now the Borg are simply victims. They are like the subjects of racism, that people hate them because they are Borg, and so which doesn't make sense if people know that they are being forced into it. They were assimilated by force. Why would you hate them? I guess it kind of makes sense because even Picard kind of hated Hugh when he first met him, but just after one talk with him, he realized he's not really the Borg. He's not really part of the collective anymore. So there's no reason to hate him. He's a victim that you can free, turn back to your own side, and so that kind of hatred is illogical if you really know all the facts and so on. So anyway, throughout the Picard show, the Borg are not really the main villain. I'm guessing maybe they will show up later. Maybe some Borg will come to reclaim that cube. Maybe they will make it scary. I hope so. I hope it will be good. And I hope they'll do it, because at this point I'm not even sure they'll do it at all. Maybe it's just it was designed to be in the trailer to pull in all the fans, and they're not actually going to do anything with the Borg. That will be probably the stupidest missed opportunity, if they don't actually have the actual Borg collective show up and wreak havoc and all of that. If it's just going to be a few drones waking up and just a small action scene on that same cube, that's not impressive. And it won't be scary. Even if they do, even if the real Borg show up, I don't think it's going to be scary anymore, because we saw all these Borg drones who are deborgified, all their implants removed. We saw, it's not a big deal to remove the implants. You can survive that, so being assimilated is not so scary. And it's like putting your villain, your monster, behind the glass and inspect it. That's something that Ridley Scott said about the alien in the Alien movies. He said after Alien 4 that the alien is no longer scary, because in that movie they took that monster, which in the old movies used to be kind of hidden in the shadows. You used to only see glimpses of it. You never saw its full form. You don't know how it really looks like fully. And it kept changing. It kept changing shapes as it evolved. And so you never knew what it's going to look like. And it was in the shadows. It jumped at you from the shadows. You never had a full glimpse of it. And it was always the upper dog. It was always the one to hunt you. It was the monster, the one you have to escape from. So it was a scary creature. And yet in Alien 4, they basically put that monster behind glass. They locked it up behind glass and made it the victim. They made the monster be a victim of the humans, and the humans abuse it in that cage, and they do whatever they want with it, and the monster is totally powerless to do anything, at first at least. Of course, later it does escape, it does kill people, and so it is still dangerous, but still, after we saw those kinds of scenes, we are never again as scared from this creature as before, because we know that these creatures can be captured, we know we can abuse them, we know that they're not really so tough, they're not really so powerful, and we know exactly how they look like fully. We know their weaknesses, we know how to deal with them, so they're not really scary anymore. They're basically like alien soldiers that you know how to defeat. You defeated them before, you captured them before, so it's not a big deal. And so it's never going to be as scary again. And that's something that Ridley Scott said about the Alien, that they basically ruined it in Alien 4. And that's one of the reasons when he made those Alien prequels, he didn't want to have that alien, because he said it's not scary anymore. That's why he made up new creatures instead, which were similar but different, which I'm not totally against. I love variety. I want to see new creatures, not just the same old creature again and again. And that's part of the problem. Even if they didn't do Alien 4, still I think the Alien, simply because we saw it so many times, it kind of gets old. You have to renew it somehow. At least in Alien 3 they kind of redesigned it a little. So I think having new creatures, similar but different, is a good idea. So I actually agree with Ridley Scott about that point. I disagreed with him with a lot of other stuff, but that point was correct in my opinion. And that's what happened with the Borg. And that's kind of what happens with all the villains in science fiction, in Stargate also. There were a lot of villains who were scary at first, but then after a while it just becomes repetitive, because of course you have to have the heroes win in the end. You cannot have them lose. So they always manage to defeat the bad guys, and so the bad guys stop being scary after a while. And that's why you have to introduce new bad guys who again will be scary at first, and then later on, after you defeat them so many times, they'll be seen as weaker. And so that's kind of a natural way in any show. So that's why I do understand why it happened to the Borg, even if they try to keep them scary as they were in the beginning. Simply by the fact that you always win in the end, that will make them weaker anyway, unless you want to have them, destroy Earth and all of that. Go that dark route, which is not a good idea for Star Trek. I explained that before, but that would be one way to do it, if you have a shock episode of the Borg actually succeeding to assimilate Earth, and then the heroes have to go on the run. So that's one possible way to go, which I don't think is the right way for Star Trek, because Star Trek was always optimistic. It shouldn't be like Battlestar Galactica. That's a different kind of science fiction. So I'm not calling for that. So I'm just saying the Borg simply shouldn't be totally pathetic. So they made them totally not scary anymore at all. They're basically like victims, they're basically poor drones who are not a threat to anyone. So what's the point to even have them? If that's what you're going to do, if you're not going to have the Borg as the villain, and you're not going to explore any of that very interesting science fiction idea of the collective and all of that, which is a fascinating idea, there's so much stuff they could have done with that, but instead you just have the Borg victims being dissected and all their parts removed and all those poor Borg drones, and that's just not so interesting and not scary. So what's even the point of all of that? At least when you had 7 of 9 in Voyager, you had a character who is kind of robotic, who becomes more human, which is a very nice story arc for a character development. I made a whole video about robotic characters and I explained why they're so lovable as characters. So if you want to have a character like that, that's totally fine. That can be cool and interesting. Even though I don't want them to do that again because we had 7 already and they did a lot of stuff with her. And I don't want to just repeat all of that. But if they want to explore the Borg for a few episodes, then maybe have a character and go into his mind and see the collective, and you can do a lot of stuff with it as well if you want to. But obviously they don't. They just want to see the Borg because they think, oh, the fans just want the Borg. And so they have the Borg on the show, but they don't have them actually do anything. They're not scary, they're not the villains. We don't get to know anything about the collective. And they're just the victims, they're pathetic, and so what's even the point? And so that's one of my many problems with this Picard show. Now the season didn't end yet, so maybe they will add all the things I mentioned, maybe they will have the Borg show up and be actually scary. So I guess we'll wait and see, but I'm not optimistic because the first half of the season was mostly a waste of time in my opinion. They didn't really do anything interesting, even though they could have. They had the perfect setup for so many interesting things, and they didn't really do anything with it. They just wasted a lot of time on all kinds of soap opera BS, and all the interesting stuff was just somewhere in the background and they didn't really deal with it. So that's one of my problems about the Picard show. That's all I wanted to say about it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.